moments from your county career to date, and that would be 2017, and the moment when your contract at Derbyshire was terminated. So in terms of that the initial reaction to that, what was going through your head? Because you've worked so hard. We've mentioned the connection from under 10s, academy cricket, second 11 cricket, making your debut just the year before. How did you react to that news in the moment, and I suppose the days that followed?
Yeah, to be honest, probably not very well. It's obviously, anyone who's experienced it will be able to vouch for the fact that it is one of the most horrific experiences you can go through, when it's something that, it's not just like losing a normal job where you can go and get another job. When it's something that you've literally, it's been your whole life ever since you was a kid. You've dedicated your whole life to, you sacrificed so much. Like, just as one example, when I was 16, 17, 18, my Friday nights when all my mates were going out, just like drinking or going out, doing whatever, my Friday nights were spent at the cricket club with my dad throwing balls at me for 2 hours every week, Thursday, Friday night, pretty much every single week of the season. And people don't really see that. And I remember, like, you're walking into a room, you sit down, they tell you you're not going to be offered another contract, and your heart just sinks into your stomach. And it is one of the most awful experiences, and I don't wish it on anyone, because it is absolutely horrific. And I remember driving home, I was almost in shock. Yeah, it's just a horrible experience. I didn't really know what to do or where to go from there, really, because it almost feels like at the time like the world's going to end. But I was quite lucky. I ended up going to Australia and playing for a season out there, which was one of the best things I've ever done. And that was massive, not only for myself at that difficult time, but also for my cricket as well. To be able to go out there and play out there as the overseas and experience different conditions and keep working on your game, keep trying to get as fit as possible and improve every aspect as much as possible, was massive for me. And I think I'd have really struggled if I wouldn't have done that.
100%. Yeah, and to be honest, in hindsight, definitely vital and very valuable that you did do that at the time, because it set you up, I suppose, on the journey back to county cricket. And you mentioned there about it is the toughest thing that you can experience in cricket. This is a staggering stat, and I read this last year. On average, if you take into consideration short-term contracts, 1-2 year contracts, the average county career lasts between 2 and 3 years, which is incredibly short when you compare that to even football or rugby, and you certainly compare it to what we call a regular job, I suppose. It's a tremendously short amount of time, considering all the sacrifice. And that's something that we as fans, commentators, pundits, we simply don't see. No one would have understood that journey. No one would have known about the sacrifice, the proverbial blood, sweat, tears that has gone into that moment. And just like that, in an instant, it's gone. It must be incredibly, incredibly tough to deal with. And it's a very, very common theme on the podcast. And for some players, it is that bad that they don't go back, because they just cannot deal with it. You know, you've put in all that, those hard yards, you've put in all that time, you've sacrificed so much for that moment, and it's gone. It must be absolutely soul destroying. And this actually brings me nicely onto a question from Chris, aka Falcons Dub on Twitter. And he asked, when you were released from the club, Tom, did you always think you'd be back at the club? Or did you think that you're going to be at another club aside from Derbyshire? Was the heart always set on Derbyshire, even though they'd, terminated your contract? Or did you, I suppose, look at other teams, look at other options during those times?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was necessarily my heart was set on Derbyshire. My heart was set on being a professional cricketer, 100%. As I say, I went away to Australia and I worked incredibly hard while I was there, not only on my cricket, but on my fitness as well. Just trying to be and improve as much as I possibly can. So when I came back from Australia, I was a much, much better player. And I came back with the thought process of I'm going to trial, because I have self-belief that I'm good enough to be a professional cricketer. And it's just about like proving that really. I remember I got back from Australia. I did really well out there playing grade cricket, which is a very, very good standard of cricket. I actually played at Scott Boland's club, and he was the captain. He's just absolutely torn it up in the Ashes as well. So I played there, learned so much, improved so much, and came back and was determined to have another crack at it. And I got back, and I remember Mal Loy, I bumped into him in the gym actually, next to the ground, and I had a coffee with him, and he said, like, I want you to come back and play in the second team. And at first I was almost a bit like, not sure. I had a chance to go to Leicester and play a few games in their second team, and that almost fell through. So I thought, yeah, why not? I spoke to Kim, who obviously was in charge at the time, and he was on board with me playing in the second team. Basically just said, if you get a load of runs, like, you never know what happens. So I think that's such an important thing. Like, as you said, it's such a horrific thing being released, and a lot of people can go the opposite way that I did and almost pack it in and give up. But I think anybody who knows me at all knows that I don't give up on anything. And I always think that if you're someone who never gives up, you can't fail, because the only way you fail is when you stop. If you stop trying and you give up, that's when you fail. If you keep trying and you're relentless, try again, trying to improve, learning as much as possible, you keep trying and keep trying, you're almost impossible to stop, because you're always improving, you're always getting better, you're always giving yourself a chance. If you're just relentless with that person is very, very difficult to stop.
It was my mic. 100%, Tom. Absolutely. And to be honest, I could not have put that any better. This is exactly why I wanted you on the County Cricket podcast, because you've experienced all of that. And the way in which you bounce back, to be honest, for a lot of cricketers, is incredibly inspirational. Because you can't hold anything against those cricketers who do experience that and go out of the game. Absolutely not, because we've already gone through it all the time, the amount of sacrifice that they've gone through. I suppose they no longer think it's worth it. But the fact that you got released in 2017, we're now sat here in 2022, you're back in county cricket, you're playing for your boyhood club again. It is a tremendous, tremendous story. That's the only way that I can describe it. It's a really inspirational one and a very motivational one as well. And I love the way in which you spoke about that so passionately there. And that brings me nicely on to a rather profound question on tonight's podcast, Tom. What drives you? What motivates Tom Wood? What motivated you during those dark days, the days where you thought your county career's over? What was the driver behind bringing Tom Wood back into the county circuit?
I think the drive was really just, it's always been my dream to play professional cricket. As we spoke about, I've been involved with the club ever since I was 10. I remember going down and watching games at the ground and just being in awe of the players. And I've always, I've sacrificed so much, I've put so much into it. And my mindset of it is, I've not done all that just to come this far. I know I've got more in the tank. I know I can give more. The last thing that I want to do is look back in 10, 20, 30 years and say, what if? What if I'd have given it another go? What if I tried a little bit harder? What if? That's the worst position I think anybody can possibly be in. I think if you've got a dream and you're determined to do it and you actually really want to do it, I think a lot of people, they have these dreams and they want to do it, but when it comes to actually doing the work and doing what is required to chase that dream and achieve it, that's when a lot of people drop off. So yeah, it's always been my dream. I'm very lucky as well. I've got two incredibly amazing and supportive parents who have always drilled into me the importance of hard work and perseverance and chasing your dream. I remember a conversation I had with my dad, and he said, we had the conversation like, am I going to give it another go? Am I going to go into the real world, try and get another job? And he said something to me which has always stuck with me. He says, there's a long time to go and get a proper job. While you can, it's a short career, chase that dream as long as you can. And that's something that's always stuck with me and has ultimately been been a driving force behind that, because you mentioned there, I went back in 2018 and trialled, but I didn't get offered a contract at the end of that year. I played the whole year in the second team, didn't get offered a contract. Went away to Australia again, played out there 2018, 2019. And then Dave Houghton came in, and he wanted to have a look at me because I did pretty well the year before in the second team. But for whatever reason, I didn't get an opportunity. And then Houts came in 2019 and said, like, we want to have a look at you. And I think I got 300s before June in the second team, which obviously helps. And obviously led to getting offered a contract. I actually got 100 against Warwickshire's second team in a one-day game that Chris Wokes played in. So I think when I did that, Hout sort of stood up and noticed me a little bit more and gave me the opportunity to come back and play in 2020, which obviously was ruined a little bit by COVID, but still managed to get back in.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the century against Warwickshire with Wokesley playing. That's a feather in the cap, isn't it? And a story which you can tell, as we've just displayed here on the podcast. Yeah, it's always nice, isn't it, to score runs against test quality bowlers. It really is. And before we talk about 2020, I'm glad you actually brought up 2018, because I wanted to touch upon that in a little bit more detail, because you mentioned there you tried for the entire season and you didn't get back in. Was there not a moment, was there never a hint of doubt that crept into your mind that maybe cricket wasn't for you? Or has that thought never entered the mind of Tom Wood?
Oh, no, absolutely. That thought's definitely crept into my mind. As I say, I pretty much trialled for 2 whole seasons. And I'd be lying if I said that thought didn't come into my mind. But again, it comes back to I have inner self-belief that I can, and the last thing I want to do is sit back and say, what if I tried a bit harder, what if I gave it another go? But yeah, them questions and the self-doubts always come in. I think anyone, you can speak to Joe Root or Ben Stokes or Steve Smith, they'll all have experienced self-doubt. And like you said, it's the moment you look back on them moments where you have done well and you have performed really well and against really good players, and you take that self-belief from there. But yeah, I think I would be lying if I said I never had any self-doubts, because I think everyone does.
Absolutely. And in fact, there was the segment, wasn't there, on BT Sports coverage with Jeremy Snape, that was, former county cricketer for a number of counties, and it was brilliant. It was going all into the psychology of Test cricket, and it is a constant theme. It is that self-doubt. It's a fear of failure at times as well. That really does creep into your head. And Tom, actually, before we talk about 2020, just a little bit about your position as a batter. Do you ever have those doubts in terms of fear of failure? Because in particular, at the top of the order, when you play there, for the majority of the time, you're going to fail a lot more times than you succeed. That's just how the nature of the beast works up the top. Do you ever have those questions, those doubts, when you're actually, out in the middle, you've got the bat in hand, and maybe the performances haven't been quite there?
Not so much out in the middle. I think once you get out in the middle, all of that stuff goes away, because you're so almost laser focused. You've only got one thing. You're just concentrating on the ball. Like leading into games, maybe waiting to bat. Like, there's obviously always, you're going to be nervous. You're going to have a little bit of anxiety before it, but I think that's absolutely normal. And that's one thing I've learned over the course of my career so far, is that nerves for me is actually a good thing, because it takes me and my intensity to the next level. And I've said this for a long time, right? The day I don't get nervous before I go and bat is the day I should retire, because it means I'm not really that bothered. So yeah, nerves, one thing I try and do is try and break it down and deconstruct it and say, okay, why am I nervous? What am I nervous about? And again, like you said, it's that fear of failure. It's the fear of messing up, the fear of looking silly in front of your teammates, in front of the crowd, the fear of letting people down. But ultimately, how I get over that is how I prepare. And I know in my preparation, I've done everything I possibly can to make sure I'm prepared for it. So then I can just trust that and go into the game knowing I've given myself the best chance. And if I do fail, like you said, it happens more often than not. You can accept failing. I can accept failing as long as I know I've done everything I can to give myself the best chance. If I've followed my process, I've stuck to my game plan, and it's just not come off on that day, hold your hands up. Fair enough, that can happen. But yeah, as you say, as long as I follow my process and I prepare as best I can accept whatever outcomes come from that. For me, it's about, instead of trying to focus on, again, it's a cliche, but it's incredibly true, especially for cricket. It's not about focusing on the outcome. If I focus on my process and my preparation and absolutely nail that, more often than not, the outcome will handle itself.